are you applauding? Nobody's here yet.
Just at my dad's.
Is it on right now? So what do you want me to do?
Oh, just make sure no one does anything.
Arnie, how long has it been since I've seen you?
I think it's been 15 minutes.
Text it, just
Yeah.
move it back to where it is.
There was a difference.
Yeah, well, one's a little more delicate and a little more Republican.
Which one?
Wyoming, I think. That's where Cheney lives. I escaped from Jackson Hole, which is where Cheney lives. Oh, God.
Renting a room in his place.
Now, I'm supposed to talk directly into this because otherwise I pop it.
I'm going to just listen to what you say and say the same thing.
Well, that's how you work for me.
That's right, he's the editor. Repeat everything.
While we're waiting for you-know-who, let me tell you that if you stay in your seats immediately following this wonderful panel in this room, I will be interviewing one of the most brilliant cartoonists who's ever set foot in this convention, a man named Mike Peters, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning political cartoonist, man who draws Mother Goose and Grimm, and easily one of the craziest human beings on this planet. I will tell you how brilliant he is. When he took his first cartoon samples up to Mad Magazine, he was told by the Mad staff that he had no talent and to give it up. And he stuck with it, and he's now one of the top. You weren't one of the people. You weren't one of them.
Thank you, because I had a great eye for talent.
Anyway, and then after that in this room, I'll be talking to Mr. Len Wein for an hour, who just was inducted into the Eisner Hall of Fame last night. Are the Eisner Awards over yet?
Hey, I have a funny story to tell. I just saw Sergio and the rest of them doing the sketch thing. Have you been?
The quick draw.
The quick draw. Yeah. And Sergio is trying to get the word dull across, and he's drawing this wind-up thing, doll, because he's got this accent, and doll sounds like doll, and nobody could guess it. It was hysterical.
Anyway, okay, sorry. Okay, tomorrow at 10 a.m., let's pretend we don't see Sergio. Shh, don't applaud. Shh, don't applaud.
On that way, on that way.
Anyway, at 10 o'clock tomorrow in room 7AB, I'll be doing the annual Jack Kirby tribute. At 11 o'clock in that same room, I'll be doing a tribute to our friend Dave Stevens, who we lost this last year. At 1 o'clock, noon in that room, I'll be doing a panel on how to become a cartoon voice actor. We'll have agents and demo people and managers and such. At 1:15, we'll be doing another cartoon voice. Anybody here see the cartoon voice panel we just did? We're going to try to top that one. I don't know if we can tomorrow. And then at 3 o'clock, I'm doing a panel called Art of the Cover, where great artists are going to look at slides of their covers and critique them. It's like shop talk. It's very exciting. Anyway,
At 4:30, he'll be selling pretzels. all those that are left.
that's right.
I think that we really ought to give a big hand to Mark. He has done, I don't know how many. He has done about 17 or 18 hosting of these panels, and he's one of the best in the world, and he knows everything. And he makes us, especially us old guys who can't remember our names even, he keeps reminding me, it's Al.
I'm not here. Is it working? No.
That sounds like the mic I had the other day.
Could somebody get Sergio's mic working?
Testing. Is this working?
Sergio, try the other. Next to you.
Is the button on the mic? Is the on button on? On the top of it, on the top of it.
It's going to be a great panel.
Check this one too.
This works.
I'm fine, okay. All right, while we're getting the microphone, these guys have nothing to say anyway. While we're getting the microphones going, so I'm at the New York Comic Convention in April, and I'm standing there talking to Al Jaffee, who was mobbed by his many admirers, and suddenly I look at my email, and I got an email from Al Feldstien saying, I'm coming to the comic convention. And I turn to Jaffee and I say, hey, let's do a panel with Feldstien. We'll get Sergio on it. Maybe I can get Arnie Kogan to come down. And they go, great, because these guys are real friends of one another. And they've been excited, and I think it's exciting to get them all together at the same time. How many people were reading Mad Magazine when these guys ruled? How many people realize that 3 of the 4 of them are still working for Mad?
Thank you for contributing to my retirement.
If you've been here, yesterday we talked at length to Al Jaffee and Al Feldstien about their pre-Mad careers. My first issue of Mad Magazine was number 70. It was the issue where Alfred was leaping over the barrels, ice skating, and then another guy was leaping at him the opposite direction, which, by the way, was the last cover that Kelly Freas painted for the magazine. He wasn't the last one printed, it was the last one he painted.
Really?
Yes. Anyway, between the time number 70 came out and I bought it, and the time number 71 came out 6 weeks later, I had hit every secondhand bookshop in Los Angeles, and I had a near-complete collection of Mad. I couldn't figure out why I couldn't find any issues older than number 25, but I had every magazine issue of Mad, and I was, from this day forward, Mad has been one of my favorite publications, and at one point, if you'd asked me what I wanted to do for a living, I would have said, I want to be the editor of Mad Magazine. And we have at my left here the gentleman who was the editor of Mad Magazine for 28 years, the man who took it, 29 years, who took it, he's editing me now. He took it from being let's face it, it was a somewhat successful magazine that didn't come out very often, and he got it on schedule, and he put together an entire staff from scratch, because the old staff left just before he took it over. And he put together the New York Yankees of humor magazines and built it into the #1 humor publication in the history of mankind. This is Mr. Al Feldstien, ladies and gentlemen. And he did it by finding talent, putting together a crew of people who were so good that for decades, Mad had the same people every issue. They were all that good. They couldn't get rid of anybody. They couldn't improve on it. One of the first new writers they found, and went on soon to become one of the top comedy writers of television. This man has 3 Emmy Awards for Empty Nest, I believe.
They're all for Carol Burnett.
They're all for Carol Burnett, and he worked on Empty Nest. He worked on the Bob Newhart Show. This is Mr. Arnie Kogan, ladies and gentlemen. If you were at the quick draw, you saw 2,400 people get up and give a well-deserved standing ovation to Mr. Al Jaffee. And my friend and the man who's been in Mad Magazine since issue 64, is it? 67? No. It was 1960, no. When was your first issue? Issue 67 in 1962. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sergio Aragones.
I just want to say one thing before we start. These 3 guys on my left, you're right, are responsible for why you applauded me, because I was the editor. Because I would have been a garbage man if it wasn't for the talent like these guys that came into my office and saved me in my life because I had to get this whole new staff together. And I have to say something about Arnie, for example. Arnie, we found him in the mail. His stuff, I mean, not him.
I was in the mail also, but that's another story.
Yeah, well, okay, but we didn't open that book and
Okay.
stuff. And he started to write for us and everything, and then he got ambitious and he wanted to go to Hollywood, and he went off with two other of the writers that we found in the mail, Larry Siegel and Stan Hart, and they all went to Hollywood, and I understand that the doors opened because you had written for Mad
Mad is a
Magazine.
tremendous credit. Of all the stuff I've done, Mad Magazine is still the biggest credit.
Well, I must say that because of that, these guys, Arnie and Stan and Larry, whenever I'd call them, and they were making this big money in television, and we had this rather penurious boss who didn't pay very much, whenever I called them to do a story for us, they never turned me down, and they worked for our crummy rate and did a TV show or a movie or whatever I asked them for. And I thank them for that.
Well, thank you. I thought it was big money, $50 a page. Started at $37.50 a page, and we went
Yeah,
up.
but you were making money with Carol Burnett
Yeah,
and
later on.
Bob
yes.
Newhart.
Yeah, that was great.
Still
Mad-
writing.
Writing for Mad was fantastic. That's great.
Let me ask you, the people in the back row, if at any point you can't hear our people, give me a signal like this so I can get them, make them go close. You gotta get real close.
I was issue number 73. The cover.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Guys, you have to get real close to these microphones.
Okay, all right, we got it.
Remember the Milton Berle joke? You're too close to the microphone. How far should I be? You got a car? Anyway, all right. Let's go back here. Harvey Kurtzman created Mad, did the first 24 issues as a comic book. It got turned into a magazine. He had this wonderful staff: Wally Wood, John Severin, Jack Davis, Will Elder. Nobody better. They did a wonderful historic magazine, comic book. Then the magazine switched to a magazine. They did a couple of issues. Magazine wasn't coming out very regularly. Mr. Kurtzman had deadline problems.
Poorly,
Yeah.
luckily.
Anyway, Mr. Kurtzman and Mr. Gaines, the publisher Bill Gaines, quarreled over money. Suddenly, Harvey was gone. He took with him Will Elder. He took with him Jack Davis. He took with him. He tried to take Wally Wood. Wood vacillated and finally decided to stay with Mad. But all of a
Thank
sudden,
God.
there was no staff. Al Feldstien had been editing comics for Bill Gaines. He'd created a little thing called Tales from the Crypt. He created a Vault of Horror, The Haunt of Fear. This is the man who wrote and edited the science fiction books, Weird Science and Weird Fantasy, and crime books, crime suspense stories and such. Those books had been were defunct thanks to largely to comic book censorship in the form of the Comics Code and the pressure groups. So Mr. Feldstien was out of work. One day he comes back, he's at the train station. He gets off his train, he's been in New York trying to drum up new accounts, new work. He's more or less unemployed. He gets off the train station and Bill Gaines is standing there. And Bill Gaines says, "Harvey's left, I'd like you to come back."
Well, that's not exactly
All
what
right.
he said. He said, I fired Harvey.
All right?
And the story, if you'd like.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Harvey was a genius, and Harvey had a tremendous amount of talent. But he was also very ambitious, and he hated the comics. When Bill Gaines' distributor went bankrupt, Bill was faced with going bankrupt himself. And Harvey said to Bill, look, you still got Mad. Get rid of everybody else and put the money up that you owe the printers via the fact that the distributor went bankrupt and was not giving him his advances and what he owed him and everything like that. And so he talked Bill and his mother and his sister into paying all the bills that were due for printing junk like Techno-Fiction and Aces High and whatever the hell else we were doing. And I was out on the street and Harvey was doing Mad. Hugh Hefner comes with a carrot. Come and do a sister magazine to Playboy called Trump. Or I don't know whether he named it or whether Harvey did, but come and do this magazine for me. And Harvey, I don't think, had the guts to go to Bill and say, after you put up all the money, I'm walking out. So he forced Bill to fire him. And he said, I want 51% of the magazine and control. And Harvey and Bill called up his old friend Lyle Stewart, who was his business manager, and had let him go when he let me go, and said, Harvey's here. He wants 51% of the magazine. And Lyle says, is he near a window? And Bill says, yeah. He says, throw him out. And Bill says, what about me? I just put up all this money to keep it going. Now, what am I going to do? And Lyle Stewart, who never liked me, and I never liked him, said, get Feldstien back. He used to do Panic, and I never could tell the difference between Mad and Panic.
So you agree, so now, the story is, so the story is now that Geen said to you, I don't know if we'll do Mad, but we'll do something. I want to be back in business with you. And you said, let's do Mad. Is that right?
Absolutely, because I'm walking around with a portfolio, and in it is a dummy for a magazine that I'm trying to sell, which is going to be like a comedy showcase before they had them on TV, with all of the off-the-wall humorists like Lenny Bruce and Bob and Ray and Nicholson Bay and like that. I wanted to do this comedy showcase magazine, and when he offered me Mad, I saw right away that I could do it with Mad.
Okay, so next day you're at work in the office, editing Mad, and you assemble your entire staff, which consisted of?
John Putnam and Wally Wood.
And what did you do? You had no staff, you had no writers, you had no artists?
Well, I started to write it myself, and I'm not very funny.
Okay.
But I was lucky because indoors, people didn't know what had happened, this chaos that was going on. And for an atheist to say this, thank God, these guys walked into the door and they were just these talents. Don Martin, Dave Berg, a writer named Frank Jacobs, who was my first freelance writer. And you know, I was grabbing them like a sponge and sucking them into this fold because I needed everybody, and I knew that I couldn't write it. And while he was doing some artwork, and Harvey had left some stuff, and I was using that, but I had to generate new stuff. And so I was very lucky. I really was. And as I said, thank God.
There was a kid who walked in the door early on who was doing production art for DC Comics and drawing occasionally for them. And he brought his samples to you, and you guys looked at him and said, maybe he could do caricatures.
Well, yeah. Well, that was a little while later when we were really kind of jumping along. You know, I feel like I'm hogging.
No. We'll get to them. We're going sequentially.
Don't worry about me. I was 12 years old, so please.
Bill Gaines and I used to go to the Dodger games together and roller derby and everything like that. Guy walks in named Mort Rucker. Shows us some hillbilly stuff, I don't know, and some other junk that he was doing for DC. I had just landed Bob and Ray's stuff. I had gone to Bob and Ray and say, I'm trying to do this comedy showcase with Mad, and can I have some of your old stuff to illustrate into articles for Mad? And he said, sure, and he gave me a box. They gave me a box of stuff. And Mort's there, and Bill says, if the Dodgers win, hire him. So I said to Mort, did you ever do caricatures? And he said, no. I said, okay, look, I got this Bob and Ray script, I just put it into production. Take these two 8x10s, Ray Elliott and Bob Goulding, whatever the name is, and
It's Bob Elliott and Ray Gould. Bob Elliott and Ray Gould.
Okay. And let me see what you can do in the way of caricatures. And it was the first caricatures that Mort Drucker ever did, and he turned in, I think, to America's greatest.
Amazing. But you also got another bonus out of your Bob and Ray association. You got one of your best writers.
Yeah, right. I'm looking through this stuff, and a lot of it's being written by a guy named Tom Koch, whatever you pronounce it, who lives out in Indiana. And I called him up and I said, hey, I see where you wrote this Bob and Ray stuff. He said, yeah. I said, I'm adopting it, but how'd you like to write for Mad? And he said, sure. And he turned into one of my most prolific and dependable writers.
He wrote the funniest single piece of Mad magazine called 43 Man Squamish. That's right. James, I'm not sure. It spits soda through your nose funny. It's very, hysterically funny. If you get a chance to look it over, it's 43-man Squamish. He's a very funny man.
Now,
I hate to be an editor, but it's 53 minutes.
It's 48.
51.
which is funnier?
12 years old.
All right, now, sequentially here, the next one who got involved with MAD was Al Jaffee. Al, would you tell us the story of how you got involved with MAD? Would you get close to the microphone and tell us this?
Well, as I said the other day, I was doing teenage comics for Stan Lee. The titles were Patsy Walker and her friends, Patsy Walker and her dog. and frankly, you know, I was making a living at it, but it really wasn't my métier. There was not much satire or humor in it. It was just, you know, how many times can you worry about who you're going to take to the prom? So, you know, I did the best I could with it, and I tried to avoid thinking about how tiresome it was becoming, and just went on doing one magazine after another. And one day I got a call from Harvey Kurtzman, who said, how would you like to work for MAD? Well, you know, the bulbs went off all over the place because I knew about MAD, and I knew it was really funny and breaking new ground, and I thought, wow, this is really an opportunity. And I asked him, you know, approximately how much I could earn, and when he mentioned what it was, it seemed, you know, it was a lot less than I was earning at that time. So I said, Harvey, let me think about it. And then after working for 3 or 4 days without sleep in order to meet my deadline for Patsy Walker, I drove in to New York, and I was into New York City, where Timely Comics was located. I think it was already called named Marvel at that time, but I'm not sure. And I brought it into Stan Lee, and Stan and I were friends, but he loved to make jokes, and he loved to kid around and you know, say somewhat deprecating things like, "What's this? You know, what's this garbage you're delivering today? Do I have to look at that?" And I was kind of burned out at that moment, and then he pulled out a page that had come in, a sample by somebody, and it was a sample of Patsy Walker, but done by somebody who could really draw. So he said, "You better look to your laurels, because look what just came in." And of course, he was kidding, because he really was satisfied with my work. The magazines were doing very, very well. But I was so tired, and I said, "Well, I don't want to look to my laurels. Maybe you ought to give him the magazine." And I left. And when I got home, there were telephone calls from Stan saying that, you know, he didn't mean what he said. But I think many of us, many of you in the audience, have reached crossroads where you realize that it may be time to move on. And I called up Harvey Kurtzman. Well, I told Stan that I thought the time was over for me and Patsy Walker. And I called up Harvey and I said, "Harvey, I'm coming to MAD." And he said, "I just quit MAD." So, but he said, "Don't worry, just you wait a little while and I'll call you in a week or two." And then he called me to tell me that I was being hired to do Trump, along with all the ex-MAD people, Will Elder and Jack Davis and part-time Wally Wood. And so I joined that group, and of course Trump failed, and then after Trump, in desperation, we decided to publish our own magazine, and we produced a magazine called Humbug, which was a very good magazine, but was poorly distributed, and we financed it ourselves, so of course it was totally underfinanced. And it also died, and I wound up with a large number of scripts that I had written ahead of time for Humbug. And I just thought about it. I said, can I call Mad? Maybe they might be interested. No, they'll hate me because I joined Harvey and left Mad. But I took a chance. I had known Al Feldstien, and I called up Al and I said, look, I got a lot of scripts. If you're interested. He said, come on down. And I went down, and he went over them with Bill Gaines, and they said, hire this guy. And they bought all the scripts, and I've been with Mad ever since, and that was in 1957.
This is Comic-Con. Explain to them what métier means. I don't know either.
Al, now for a while you were just writing for Mad. You didn't draw from them immediately.
Yes, I sold these scripts, and Al gave them to other artists who did very beautiful work on it. And it seemed like that would be, my relationship with Mad would be as a writer. And I was happy with that too. But basically I'm a cartoonist. I'm not really a writer. But the only way I've ever been able to sell my cartoons, which, never blew anybody away, was to write some funny stuff, and the funny stuff helped sell my cartoons. So I did all my scripts in drawings, and then Al would hand these roughly drawn scripts to the artists, and they would just follow it. And at some point, I was, somebody said my drawings, sketches on these scripts were sometimes funnier than what came in by other artists.
Somebody.
Well, the somebody who shall be unnamed, Al Feldstien. Yes, Al Feldstien said, your stuff is funny. As a matter of fact, one of the things you said to me, he said, you know something, Al? There are a lot of scripts I probably wouldn't have bought from you, but your sketches were so funny that I just couldn't resist it. And we had a very wonderful relationship for many, many years. I think Al was a very excellent editor. He knew his stuff.
Arnie, where were you living? What were you doing when you started submitting to Mad?
I was in Brooklyn. My first comedy sale ever was to Mad Magazine. It wasn't through the mail.
Talk to the microphone.
It was not through the mail. I went to the office, saw Jerry DeFuscio. I think Nick Medlin was in the Army at the time.
Yes.
And I had this idea for a routine I wrote for a comic named Morty Gunty, who I had not sold to yet. And the idea was vacation switches. At that time, Eisenhower was president. If President Eisenhower went to Brighton Beach in Brooklyn, and somebody in Brooklyn went to Gettysburg for a vacation. That was the idea. And he said, this is funny, but it's too late. We're doing our summer issues. He said, if you want, you can try other Mad imitations. At that time, Mad had like 45 imitations. They had Think, T-H-I-M-K, and Crazy, and Cracked. I went to a place called Panic, not the New Panic. Bob Farrell, met with him at his home in a penthouse on Park Avenue. He said, this is funny, you have anything else? I said, well, I'll think of some stuff. I gave him like 5 stories, 17 pages. I said, do you like it? He said, I like it all. I'm buying all of them. I said, wow. And I started to figure the money, $25 a page, $375, much more than I could have made anywhere else. And he said, but I can't pay you until a year from Thursday, or something, something like that. I can't pay you now. If you want, you can bring these back to Mad Magazine. I brought them back to Mad. I presented them to you. There were like 4 stories. You bought 3. I got a check 2 weeks later. It was one of the biggest thrills of my life, except for my honeymoon, but this was sexier in many ways.
I'm really sorry about that.
2-page story. 2-page story number 48, graduation speeches that somebody listened to. But 3 days later, I got a check, and I sold the 3-page story in the mail for a magazine piece, a magazine, Family Magazines, I believe. Yeah. It's called Family. Anyway, I said at one point when I submitted my stuff to you, it was a 3-week period. I said, "Are you buying this?" He said, "It's in the works." I didn't know what that meant, but it meant you were laying it out and giving it art and so forth. So that was my start, and then I started running for stand-up comics and TV people, and I was working for my father around this time, right before this. My father had fired me twice, sent me out of the office, and so this was great, writing comedy. I loved it, and it was great writing for Mad Magazine.
Arnie, tell them some of the people you've written for other than that, some of the comedians you've written for, some of the TV shows.
Carol Burnett, Newhart, Mary Tyler Moore, Dean Martin, The Tonight Show in New York with Johnny Carson, Empty Nest, Edie Gourmet and Steve Lawrence, Connie Stevens, Shelley Berman. I was like a bazillion comics.
Did you write the phone, tearing the phone off the wall bit? No, never mind.
Which one?
The tearing the phone off the wall bit, no.
Did not, no.
All right.
No.
And how many articles do you think you've written for Mad over the years?
My guess is over 200, I think.
What's your favorite?
Well, my favorite was a thing called Hippie Magazine in the 60s. We're talking about the 60s. I think that was. And also Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was, I think, one of them during your period also. But I've had quite a few that I liked.
Now, I have a question that I've asked this question of Al before. I'm going to ask it again of you.
Okay.
I'm going to ask Feldstien the question. I'm going to ask you to respond to
All right.
on this, right?
Yeah.
If you had 2 writers, a movie comes out, you want to do a parody of a movie. 2 writers come to you and they say, I want this job of parodying this movie. One of them says to you, I love this movie, this was my favorite movie, please let me write the parody of it. Another one comes to you and says, I hated this movie, it was the biggest piece of crap I ever saw, let me write the parody of it. They're otherwise equally matched in skill. Which one do you give it to?
I would go with the guy that loved it. I think most people would go with the guy that hated it. I'd go.
Al, what would you do?
I'd probably go to the guy that loved it, except that he wouldn't have had a chance to come to me. I would have already gone to him, because we were right up ahead. We never had volunteers that came to me and said, I want to do this or anything like that. I used to say, please do this. I used to get on my knees and beg.
Arnie, did you ever write anything for Mad that a subject you were really angry about? You said like something happened to you, or you were mad about something, and you said, I'm gonna get my revenge in Mad.
No, the thing that came closest was a thing called What is a Blind Date? I had many blind dates in my life, none of them successful. So Steve Allen used to do a thing called What is a Boy and What is a Girl, and I wrote this two-page piece called What is a Blind Date about dating a blind date, and I liked it.
Sergio,
Sir.
It has been told more often than the story of Batman's origin, but would you tell us again, for the record, the story of how you got into Mad Magazine?
That was a lot of fun. I was a cartoonist in Mexico City, and I was a fan of Mad. I didn't understand it because I didn't speak any English, but I would run after my friends who spoke English, and every time they saw me with a Mad in the hand, they would run away because they know that they have to translate everything for me. But I loved it, and I have decided to go to the States to try fame and fortune, you know. So I took a bus, went to New York, and didn't know the city, didn't speak the language, and started going to all kinds of magazines that I have names of, like Army Gags and Laugh and Dolls, and all these strange magazines, and everybody told me, these cartoons are crazy, you should go to Mad. Well, I knew Mad, and they didn't have gags. They had satire and movie critiques, and it was delightful. Everything was, I knew exactly, they make fun of commercials and everything, but they didn't have gags. So when I went there, I knew I just went to meet the guys because I was ready for a rejection. So I arrived to MAD, and I didn't know what to say, so I asked for Antonio Proillas because I knew he spoke Spanish. So I went there, and the lady says, yes, she says, Antonio Proillas? I says, just a minute, and he was there. So Antonio comes out, and we start speaking Spanish, of course, and Antonio kept calling everybody his brother, because Cubans call him, mi hermano, mi hermano, mi hermano. So I arrived at all the cartoonists from Mexico, and the first thing was, mi hermano, mi hermano. And so we start talking, and I told him I was a cartoonist and everything, and says, can you introduce me to the people here? I said, well, you have to introduce yourself because I don't speak English either. You know? So then Jerry the food show came in, and Antonio introduced me to him as his brother. So Jerry kept calling me Mr. Proillas. And every time he called me Mr. Proillas, I say, no, Aragones. And he didn't know what Aragones was. So he kept calling me Mr. Proillas. And I said, no, Aragones. Eventually he realized that my name was Aragones. So. And I showed the work, and he looked at it and says, just a minute. So he went and gave it to Al. Then I don't know what happened, you know. And I heard voices inside, but I was talking with Antonio. Then this gentleman comes out with my page, with a cartoon, and says, do you sell this? I can give it to you. And what happened is that I have single gags. Cartoon magazine, which is what I did. But Mr. Feldstien realized that if they put a lot of them together, they had a mad look at. So they figured it out, well, you have a lot of cartoons about astronauts. So we buy this, and that, and it's going to be called the United States Space Effort.
Yeah, mad look at the space effort.
Yes, so they bought them, you know, and I couldn't believe it. And to me, they came, because I knew that I was visiting, they came out with a check, who was the biggest check I have ever seen in my life.
$35.
Oh! And I was so amazed. And the guy said, he was very busy all the time, so he said, here, when he went back inside. And I couldn't believe it. My first thing that they showed, they bought these 2 pages. In those times, they used to pay, this is in '62, $50 a page for art and $50 for a script. So my check was for $200. $200 in '62 was a lot of money. And usually they would pay me $1 for cartoon, so they had $200. So I was delighted because that was my first sale. So after that, the future said, you have to bring them more cartoons. And says, but like what? It was so fast, everything. He says, well, you have a couple of cartoons of motorcycle cops. Make more and bring them to Feldstien. Well, I went to the place where I was staying. I wouldn't even call it a hotel. And I worked all night.
It's
and
made
next
out
morning,
of cardboard, right?
yeah, I mean, the sounds in the other room were. So I worked all night, and next morning I arrived to the office before they opened. And when they start arriving, it says, what do you hear? It says, here are the cartoons. So I have a bunch of cartoons, and they showed it to him, and he bought them. Next day, he bought a whole article about look at motorcycle cops. So then I says, can I bring more? And says, no, we already bought two articles. So I started showing them drawing gags as covers, and he bought 3 covers on a row. And
Cover ideas he's talking
yes,
about.
cover for the ideas. And I was because I didn't know anybody in New York, because I didn't have anybody there. They became my family. So every day I went to MAD and sat there. You know, I was introduced to everybody. They let me read the magazines, and I keep bothering all the editors, asking them what that means and what that means, because my English was still terrible. But I suddenly became an attachment to the magazine. I don't know what they thought about me, but I never left. Ever. I slept there. Because sometimes I didn't have to, no? But it was great. They treated me And one day I decided that I could not stand the marginals. You know, the little thingies on the borders.
At that point, the marginal gags were word gags.
Word gag.
They would have a theme. They had a little character named Marginal Marvin,
Right.
and they would
And I was writing.
and they would all throughout the issue. They have like little variations on gag. They have a theme, and there'd be different jokes.
Yeah, we do takeoffs on song titles or whatever, and
Yeah, so when I look at it, he says, what that means? And he would say, well, do you know that song? I says, no. Well, then you will understand it. And then 2 minutes later, what does this mean? And he says, did you read this book? No. Well, you won't understand it either. So I figured, well, if I do my little cartoons in there without words, everybody could understand it.
Right.
So I told them, and they said, no, that wouldn't work. So I drew,
who said it wouldn't work?
I don't remember.
Not me.
No. But
I said,
what happened is
Sergio,
that
get in front of the mic.
I drew them on the real size and pasted them up in the magazine, covering those sayings that they were there. So I pasted them up like that, and then I went to Feldstien. I said, oh, by the way, one of the hardest things for me was to be able to call Al. Because in Mexico, we never call anybody older than you by the first name. So it was Mr. Feldstien. And when they call, he would come looking at me and says, call me Al. And I saw her because I couldn't. It was like same thing with Bill. He was Mr. Gaines, and to this day, sometimes I cannot call him Al because it's Mr. Feldstien. So I went to Al.
Mr. Feldstien, please.
Mr. Feldstien, and then I have pasted up at the top of the things, the cartoons. I went to him, and he looked at it. Says, what? No, look. There's nothing here. He kept looking at the whole thing until he found it. And then he looked at it and he liked it. They said, well, let's run them until he gets run out of ideas. I'm still doing them. But that was it.
We gave him a place to sleep. We gave him food. We just knew that we had a great talent. And when he showed us those drawn-out dramas, and I was so relieved that I could get rid of that stupid Marginal Marvin. And he's been doing those margins ever since. And I want to tell you something about this guy. He is a deep, bottomless well of creativity. He is just wonderful.
Thank you.
I almost didn't sell my first story to Matt because I told Bill Gaines I wanted 51% of the business. And he said, I'm not sure we can do that. So I had some troubles.
Let me mention some other oh yeah, go ahead.
Mention that on the same issue.
Oh, in the same issue that Sergio had his first story appear, Al went back to drawing. Actually, what Al did in that issue was a thing called If Kids Built Their Own Inventions, like that. They actually built these sketches, they took childlike drawings and built replicas of them. And then after that, Al started drawing again for the magazine that same time. Now,
And then one day, he says to me, Playboy's got a fold out. Why don't we do a fold in?
How did that work out?
I'm not sure. And I said, well, what did you have in mind like? And he said, he brings me in this sketch of Burton and Elizabeth Taylor and Eddie Fisher. And when you fold in Burton and Fisher disappears, and Burton is in Elizabeth Taylor's arms, and I said, that is fantastic. And we did it in the back cover. It was black and white. Later on, we gave him color. And he's been doing those fold-ins ever since. And the only problem that I ever had with Al with his fold-ins was I tried to get him not to do them symmetrically so you could see what was coming together. I tried, and he really worked hard at that. That was the hardest part. And the other hard part was that little caption on the bottom to fold in and make sense. But that was, I love fold-ins.
all right, let me mention the names of other people involved with MAD, and anybody who has got a story about them or a comment, just jump in there. Dave Berg.
Very
Silence.
Very colorful, unusual guy, and very likable, I think, you know.
Dave was, Bill Gaines loved Dave's work, and Bill said, you make sure that he's in every issue. Dave was like our connection with the lower, middle level of humor. A lot of artists and writers didn't care for him because they thought he was corny and everything like that. But he was a hard worker. He would get a subject and he would interview people and come up with jokes. And he was persistent, and he did a wonderful job. And I'm sorry that he's passed away. Because
he did. He did the lighter side of playgrounds, the lighter side of children, the lighter side of television. One year, at one issue, he did the lighter side of winter. Larry Siegel came over to him and said, you're going to alienate a lot of winter people. They're going to get very, very upset. He said, what do you mean? He just couldn't deal with it.
My recollection of Dave Berg was that he was sincerely involved in his work. To him, I think it was a very, very big part of his ego and his whole life. And whereas many of us, if we have to do a scene in a dentist's office or at some location, we don't go there. We just imagine what it must be like from some experience when you had occasion to go to a doctor or a dentist. But Dave Berg, I think he kind of visualized himself as being a famous reporter. And he would go to the dentist's office and interview the dentist. And he would sit around and interview some of the patients, and he'd take a few pictures and
get his tooth pulled.
And he'd come back and he'd put together the scene. He had pictures of the office and the equipment. And I mean, he just didn't treat it lightly. He treated it as if he was on a major, like a war correspondent. He was on a mission. And I believe that one of the reasons why his work was popular for a very, very long time, we made fun of Dave, because he almost asked for it. He was so serious about. Did you see what I did with the dentist's office, And I mean, we're all pros and, we do our job. I mean, we're not sitting around examining all the little details that each other is into. And so we kind of kidded him about, come on, Dave, your dentist's office is a dentist's office. But I interviewed the doctor and he told me this, he told me that. Well, that that kind of integrity that he had about his work, I think came through to the average person and touched them in the same way, that he was touched by, or, that he felt about it. And that's why I didn't look down on his work and say it's unsophisticated, and it's it's kind of appealing to ordinary people, not to the great critics. I think he reached ordinary people, and he reached them very well, and I think he did an excellent job.
Talking about teasing Dave Berg or him thinking himself a correspondent, all the guys at MAD, as you know, Bill Gaines used to take us on these MAD trips around the world, and all the writers and cartoonists and editors, we went over there. I had a great time, and one day we were in France, in the little town where the painter
Monet
has his studio, And we were having dinner in a restaurant, and one of the writers stood up and said, because they were the guys that made all the jokes, is, David, now that we're here, we want to thank you because you were one of the first guys who arrived here and rescued this town from the Germans. You were fantastic, and we want to thank you here in public that we're back in the town that you rescued from the Germans, blah, 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 with beautiful prose, and we all applauding to Dave Berg, you know. And we continue our meeting laughing our heads off. And suddenly a committee of French people come in with bottles of champagne. And thank you to Dave Berg for having been here. And we were kissing him all over. And we were so
Singing the Marseillaise.
You had to go on a mad trip because first of all, Bill's idea of the mad trip started when he looked around. He said, you know, I got people all over the country contributing to this magazine and nobody knows anybody. So I'll take you on a trip. We went to Haiti first, and I told the story already about the one American kid that was subscribing. We piled into the Jeeps and begged him to resubscribe. But
The kid opens his door one day and there's the staff of Mad saying, please resubscribe.
Right. But what was going on was the writers were in competition with who would be funnier and how much wilder could we get. And these trips were hysterical. I mean, I had to change my pants a couple of times a day.
I did that twice today.
That's old age, not funny.
The rule was that each freelancer had to sell a certain number of pages per year to be invited on the trip.
Right.
That's right. Now the story is told that when Bill Gaines' mother died,
Let me tell us.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm involved. You had to have a certain amount of pages. Gaines is very specific. You got to have. Anyway, my first year there, I had 18 pages, and people said, "Arnie, you were going to go to Haiti. You're going, right?" I said, "I don't know." And then Gaines said, "No, you can't go. Why not?" Kogan can't go because he only has 18 pages. He needs 20 pages. They said, for 2 pages, you're not going to let him? No, he can't go. He only has 18 pages. Anyway, they went on the trip. It was an hysterical trip. About 2-3 years later, Gaines' mother died. They said, Arnie, you going to the funeral? I said, I don't have enough pages.
That's a true story.
Even though I was not on the Haiti trip, I understand it was a very, very funny trip. And you at one point took some donkeys or some mules down a steep hill, very dangerous.
Yeah, right. We went out to the Citadel, which was the fortress on the top of the mountain that Christoph built.
A very dangerous journey, and there were mules going down. And Larry Gore, the publicist,
yes.
A line I heard about him was that he said, I'm a little worried, a donkey just crossed himself. It was dangerous.
Arnie, who was the mad writer who was on a trip was approached by a hooker? Was that you?
That was me.
Yes.
He approached me and wanted to have sex with me. I said, how much do you charge for heavy petting? That's a phrase we used to pet many years ago.
I remember I think Al knows more about this than I do because we were in Haiti, and that was our first trip.
Yes, it was.
And Bill found out that we had one mad subscriber in Haiti, and he didn't renew. So Bill gathered up a group of us to go to his house and ask him why he didn't renew. Can you imagine 24 people arriving to ask a guy why he didn't renew his subscription?
I remember waking up one morning and going out to the pool to take a swim, and in the middle of the pool is a table, a chair, 4 chairs, and an umbrella under the water.
Who did it?
I think Nick McLean.
Okay. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that on one of the trips, Al and I were roommates. And after we returned, we both got divorced. So I wonder what kind of a message was coming.
Sergio, list some of the places that Mad Trips went.
Oh, we have in Europe, in every place in Europe, from Spain, Morocco, France, Italy, Greece, Russia, Germany, Denmark, England. This is in Europe alone. Then we have been in Africa. We've been in safari, Kenya,
Tanzania.
Then we went to Tahiti. We went to Mexico, and that was great because that's the trip that I organized. I took Bill Gates says, "We're going to Mexico," and says, "You want to help us fix it?" So I went a week before, and I organized the trip. So when they arrived, everything was already in paper what they had to do. I organized a bullfight, so they had to fight bulls. They did. It was very courageous. It had great shots, and the best part of it, that's my mother cooked a paella, which is a Spanish dish for everybody. But first we had been, I think, in the bullfight, and everybody came, they were already half drunk. But when they arrived to the house, my mother have taken all the garden and put tables with covers and little lanterns.
It was beautiful.
Yeah.
Interesting story, when they went to Russia, they were going to Crocodile, which was the equivalent of Mad magazine in Russia. It was a humor magazine, but it was run by the state. And they brought, well, yeah.
So it was much funnier than our magazine. And they paid more, by the way.
So let me finish with Mexico, because it was great. So that was to me one of probably the most best experience I ever had in my life. And one of the places that I took him is called Xochimilco, which is the floating gardens, and they have boats decorated with flowers that usually says Margarita and Linda and I love you and things like that. So our boat says, "Fuck you, Bill." Flowers. Well, they laughed their heads off to start with, but the funny part was when we were in the boat going, and all the tourists reading the name and trying to take pictures, falling out of the boats, just trying to read that sign. Oh, it was great. It was a lot of fun.
I'm really sorry I interrupted your story. I thought you were finished, but I just wanted to tell about the fact that when they got off the plane to going into Russia, and they were carrying lots of copies of Mad that they were going to show to the staff at Crocodile, and they were all confiscated. Yeah.
Two quick stories, maybe fairly quick. Suriname, were you in Suriname with us?
I didn't have enough pages.
That's not too bad. All right, anyway, in Suriname, we're going down a river called the Marijuana River in Suriname, and there are tribes on both sides, totally naked, but we forgot about that because of the laughs. We stopped off at one tribe place, and the tribe place, very verbal. And Nick Meglin started to draw a picture of the tribal chieftain. He had his art pad out and drawing a picture, and he showed it to the tribal chieftain. He said, "Good," whatever he said, "Nice." And Nick started to take it and put it back, and the chief said, "No, I want. And Nick said, "No, I drew it, it's mine." He said, "I want." Nick said to us, he said, "Slowly, don't turn around, back up towards the truck." Always moving, back up. The other one I have was a line that when I was in the ocean in Puerto Rico, I came out and somebody said, "How's the water?" I said, "It needs salt." That's the one I remember.
Well, in Greece, we were having dinner, and John Putnam took his pen, and he started talking to the pen like this. And so I took the pen and I went like I was talking with him with a pen. We had police following us to the whole. We had people behind us, secret police.
Now, on a Mad trip, Bill Gaines paid for everything.
Yes.
Right.
He even gave you
But he didn't allow wives.
No wives.
No way. But he had a reason, a very logical one.
Well, one of his reasons that I know of, and maybe you know of another one, is that he didn't want any competition with clothing and all that extra junk. And these guys that were coming on these trips couldn't really afford them. I mean, this was a bonus for them. No, what a freelance artist working at a board can afford to fly to Russia or go on an African safari? So he wanted that to be enjoyed by these guys, stag, which is why we got divorced, didn't we?
As I said, there were three reasons. One of them is the difference because some cartoonists made more money than others and writers and stuff. So the discrepancy on the wives, because men didn't care, we know that wives will be a little more worried that somebody's wearing something better, and that was one. The second, more obvious, is that if we were with the wives, we'll spend the whole time with the wives instead of being all together talking with each other, having dinner just with the guys, you know. And the third one,
It was just very gay. That way.
no, is that some had first wives and some had second wives. And the wives knew the first wives, and there was a little like, I didn't remember the other lady, or the age discrepancy too, you know. So he says, no wives, no trouble, just the guys. Anyway.
So now Bill paid for everything. Let's talk a little about Bill Gaines. Let's talk about the kind of guy he was. For the people who never got the chance to meet Bill, what should they know about him?
Well, I think he loved our group as if we were family members. In fact, you correct me, Al, if I'm wrong about this, he was not eager to have new people come in to submit.
It made him nervous.
He wanted to keep all the guys that had stuck with him through thick and thin and keep them working and keep them busy, so that George Woodbridge and Bob Clark and Dave Berg and I would make a living working for MAD and not have to go desperately looking for work elsewhere. And so he was very loyal to us, and he also, in a sense, was egalitarian. That is, he wouldn't play one person off against another, or would he listen to arguments of why am I getting treated not as well as another guy? It takes me twice as long to draw. The page rates were the same for everybody, for writers, for artists, and so that no one could get into squabbles. And it worked quite well. However, later on, other opportunities came along, like paperback books and offers from freelance work from other magazines or from book publishers. Bill was not a negotiator. If you went into him and you said, I can make some extra money working for so-and-so, he said, well, if you work for them, you won't work for us. And it was simple as that. He was a straightforward. He was very honest about his position, and we accepted it, and he treated us well, and I have no complaints.
Yeah, I love Bill Gaines. For me, he was like Santa Claus. He would give you checks at Christmas time.
Yeah.
We had dinners at his house with wine, and he was a terrific guy. It was great being around Bill, just coming in and seeing him. A little eccentric, but great guy.
He really knew how to treat talent, and he encouraged them. He didn't interfere with the way they did their creativity. He let me run MAD freely. He never stuck his nose in, and he would only occasionally join in maybe a cover conference, and only just to listen. And Bill read MAD magazine just before it went to press, like a fan. I'd give him the whole pile of mechanicals, they call them, which was the artwork and the topography, and he would read it like a kid was going to read it. And I'd hear him cackling in the next room or in his office. And the only thing that he read MAD for was libel or slander or something that would interfere with his business. But as far as editorial was concerned, he gave me and the writers a free hand, and I really appreciated that.
Didn't you also check to see that there was, really bad taste, material obscenity or nudity?
Let that go.
How often did he ask you to change something?
I can't really remember any. There was one thing that he said, this was copyright libel, I think, or something like that, and I changed it, but it was minor.
Would you say that one of the things that made MAD was that Bill was courageous in being a
foolhardy. I'm not sure
Okay.
which. He let me run this magazine, and I let the writers write the stuff. And I used to go around saying, Mad is bipartisan. We shoot at both sides.
Speaking of both sides, the cover, you talk about covers on Mad. I think a classic cover, it may have been during your years, I think it was. That right after the election, Kennedy and Nixon, the next day on the newsstand was the cover of Mad magazine with a picture of John F. Kennedy. Congratulations, John F. Kennedy. We knew you'd win. In the back, congratulations, Richard Nixon. We knew you'd win.
I have a story about that cover, and I'll try to make it quick. We get this idea that we're going to do the front cover and then turn it upside down, the back cover, and hope that the newsstand dealer would be smart enough to put the right one, or maybe not. Even if he put the wrong one, it would be kind of fun. But anyway, I get the proof, and I'm reading in the local paper that John F. Kennedy's coming through Sunrise Highway in Long Island, which is where I lived, on his campaign tour. And so I tear the cover in half. This proof that I just got. Congratulations, John F. Kennedy, on the election. We knew you'd win, blah, blah, whatever. And I'm waiting out there in the sun for 2 hours, and finally he comes by, and it isn't like today. There was hardly any social security people. And I run out, and I give him this cover. And he looks at it, and he turns back to me, and he's waving at me. It was really kind of a thrill. I know I just bored you, but okay.
Go ahead.
No, but Bill, he was, to me, he was like an uncle, like family. Because from the day I arrived to Matt, he treated me so well. And he was extremely generous with everything and with his friendship. And he took me to Europe many times when he was going to make deals with other publishers. He will take me as his translator because I speak a few languages, and he will, just to facilitate things and having other people involved in it, I will go from Spain or French and English. So he was a terrific family. But he was the most eccentric man I have ever met in my life, because he was so generous. He will take you for dinner and buy these expensive bottles of wine and everything. He wouldn't complain. But when he came to matters of the office, he wanted everything to the cent, to the point that he will ask who called New Jersey when they live in New York and for a 50-cent call. And until he found out who made that 50-cent call, I says, oh, I called New Jersey. Well, you owe me 50 cents to the penny.
Right.
But he was the most generous man in everything. And talking about eccentric, he has 3 sets of clothes because he changed weights, and they were the same color, like for a small, medium, and large. Well, no, large, extra large, and extra, extra large. But he had 3 sets.
Yeah, all tattered, all
And stained.
yeah.
And he'll go, for instance, to a restaurant and says, no, you cannot come in. There was a restaurant down below Matt, and he went had their lunch and says, no, you cannot come in because you don't have a tie. So he called all his friends, big publishers, and they will call us as, this is the president of this company, and we heard that we want to have 20 people, Says, but we don't wear ties. So he had all his friends cancel, to the point that the owner of the restaurant came to the office and told Bill Gates, you can come in, dress any way you want. And from that moment, the restaurant canceled the wear ties. So he was amazing.
He was a fierce non-smoking advocate at some point in the
yes.
magazine.
Some of us did smoke at the time, but we were running these fantastic anti-smoking campaigns. I'm sorry.
Now, people always want to know about Mad getting sued, and I want to ask a little bit about the big-time Mad lawsuit, which involved Irving Berlin.
Well, I can tell you mostly about that one. Our great lyricist, Frank Jacobs, proposed that we do a sing-along with Mad songbook because Mitch Miller was popular in those days, and his sing-along with sing-along with Mitch TV show. So we did 52 songs sung to the tune of in various categories. and all of a sudden we're sued by 9 or 11, I forget which, composers and publishers who want 2 cents for every copy of every lyric we published and 2 cents for every copy of the music we published. Well, the music was sung to the tune of. It was a very interesting suit, and we were scared stiff because if they had prevailed, they would have completely wiped us out. I mean, it was a fortune. Judge Kaufman, who was the judge in the Rosenberg trial, looked at this thing, and he was the appeals judge. I think they lost in the early court. And he said, Irving Berlin doesn't have a proprietary interest in iambic pentameter, which means that you can write a poem to one of his songs, and this is not interfering with his lyrics. And he said, in fact, some of the lyrics were even better. And as far as sung to the tune of is concerned, I didn't see any of the music published. And if you guys, meaning the plaintiffs, wrote memorable music that these people could sing these poems to, that's your problem, not Mad Magazine's problem. And he threw it out. And that was that. And we were...
Now, how often... How often in Mad, I can think of one example you'll probably talk about, did you regret doing something in the magazine? You looked at it afterwards and went, wow, we shouldn't have done
Ask
this.
those guys.
No, tell us about the cover that you got in trouble on.
Oh, you mean our finger cover? Yeah, our finger cover. We got in trouble with our finger cover, right?
From who?
Ladies,
From the finger.
ladies around the country. I was very naive. I thought that meant up yours, which meant, you know, screw you. You cut me off, up yours. You do it out the window with the car or anything like that. So we did a thing. I had Norman paint this beautiful finger hand, and it was going to be #1 in a field of one or whatever the hell it was. #1. All of a sudden, all the women in the country were all upset. I didn't know that this had some sexual connotation, and we were getting thrown out of drugstores and
You were thrown out of drugstores.
yeah, out of drugstore chains like Whalen's and whatever. Yeah. So that was our trouble. That was one of the problems.
What was the best-selling cover you ever did?
Surprisingly enough, it didn't have Alfred on it. All of our covers had Alfred, and this one, which sold the best, did not have Alfred on it. It had his sneakers sticking up through a life preserver, which said Poseidon, and the ship was sinking in the background. And that was our highest selling magazine. We sold 2,875,000 copies of it or something like that. No Alfred. Shows you how important it was.
Sending a message. It was sending a message.
Yeah, right.
All right, let's talk about a couple other people from Mad. Prohias.
Yes.
A man who was a cartoonist who was actually sentenced to death in Cuba.
Yeah, well, he was a very popular cartoonist before he came to the States. In Cuba, one of the best editorial cartoonists over there. And in the beginning, he was very pro-Castro. You know, he defended the revolution and independence and everything. But when Castro started doing bad things, he started talking about it. And then he was put on the death sentence, so he had to escape, and he came to the States. You know, and we talk a lot about over there. He was really disappointed at the Cuban government about everything. And the problem with Antonio is that he was so Cuban that he never learned English. And after a while, he forgot his Spanish. So for a long time, we just sort of like talk very, very basic.
He became non-lingual.
Well, he was also, everybody were bought of jokes in Mad. You know, we made jokes about everybody. But one of the jokes is that one day he got a letter from Cuba. We got and it didn't have an inside because it had been lost or something. So Mr. Jaffee, who is the master of pretending to speak languages that they don't exist, he wrote a letter in pseudo Spanish. And every few seconds I will tell words like mañana, so he will, mañana, blah, 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 like he does, and I would say con gusto, and he would con gusto, blah. So, and then he gives people a signature, and we put it back on the envelope, and we give it to Antonio, and says, hey Antonio, this is a letter from you from Cuba, sorry it's open. So we were waiting for the joke to see what he reacted. He says, what the heck is this? No, because it was nothing. So he went in front of us and he read it. And he put it back and we went in to see what he said. He said, oh, very good, fantastic, thank you very much. So we didn't have the face to tell him he was because he took it so normal that he really read it. You know? So we didn't say anything to poor Antonio, but
I remember a story where he was apparently really trying hard to learn English, and I came into the office, and he ran up to me. He was a very loving man. I think he invented hugging. He hugged me, hermano, you know, and he threw his arm around, and. This time he had a big smile on his face, and he said to me, Jaffee, I come and all go no gas curse in the door, and I make the word. And he smiled, waiting for an answer. I said, Antonio, I don't think I understood. And he got angry. He said, I study English. And you don't understand.
When he first walked into the office, of course, he didn't speak a word of English, and thank God John Putnam, who had been around the world a couple of times and was very good at languages because his mother had been a very famous writer, translated for me, and Antonio showed me this thing called Spy versus Spy, and it was right. And it was just during the Cold War that kind of encapsulated this whole idiocy, and I said, we gotta run that, and we did.
Yeah, the strip he had in Cuba, before that it was called El Hombre Siniestro, the sinister man. And it was one man that did all these things against other people, and based on that he created the Spy vs. Spy. But that character was very, very popular. So I remember it all the way from Mexico, from the Cuban magazines. And but he was so, we be the world gullible that he believes everything.
Yeah, gullible.
He was the epitome of innocence, is what he was. But at the same time, he was very socially conscious, and he was very conscious of the Cold War and the threat to our existence.
That Spy vs. Spy, he will read every book on politics in Spanish, on spying and everything. So he was really documented about all kinds of things before he did the strip and doing. And he will go, he had a family in Florida, so he worked in New York. He lived in a very humble room with a Puerto Rican family in Upper New York. Very, very, just like one room, you know, and all the money he sent to his family, everything. And he kept on to arrive to Florida and get together with all his Cuban friends in the coffee house and the dinners and the drinks and everything, and he will pay for it, for everybody, because he was the Cuban who made it in New York. He was the most successful cartoonist from Cuba in the foreign lands. So he will save all this money to take care of all his friends. He will arrive over there and they will go around him. I was there once, I visited him. There were like 20 people on the table and all of them having rum and cokes and everything. And when the bill, he paid for it. He said, Antonio, what are you doing? All these people are moochers. You know what I mean? Do you know everybody? All of my friends, you know, this in Spanish. Oh, Antonio, you know. And everybody, Antonio. He was a great man. He was an amazing man.
And he was creative. He was a genius with his creativity, which is what Spy vs. Spy was all about, and which I sadly feel is lacking in the guy that took over from him in Mad now. I don't think he's as inventive as Prohias was.
Let me ask, we're getting near the end here. I want to ask an overall kind of overview and question leading up to the end here. Talk about this topic of how people react to you when you tell them you work for MAD. When you meet people and they tell you they work for MAD. Now, I know, Sergio, frequently people have told you how much they love your Spy versus Spy.
Constantly.
Yes.
Constantly.
And what are the reactions that
Incredibly
you get?
positive, a big, huge positive reaction. Man, it's great, as you know, it's a classic, and from the writer's point of view, it was good to be part of the magazine in the 60s when it started. It's like when SNL, Saturday Night Live, started to be the writer the first 4 or 5 years of that, and Friends and The Simpsons. It's great to be part of a comedy institution, and people, I think they love it. I've never had a negative reaction about Mad Magazine, ever.
It had been changed through the years because in the beginning was exactly that reaction. Now you get from is that still on?
Yeah, right. And the average age that reads it, I'm not sure, 9.5, 12. I'm not sure what the readership is, but a lot of people over 40 still remember it, and a lot of them still read it. So.
Al, what kind of reaction you get from people when they find out you do MAD?
Mostly positive. I had this is a little bit off the subject, but I had one aggravation that used to grudge me. That's a Yiddish word. The New York Times Magazine wrote a whole article about how MAD was affecting the young people and the protests of the Vietnamese War and blah, 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 blah. And then they talked about Harvey Kurtzman. Never mentioned me. And the whole thing that they were talking about was my magazine, our magazine, during the Vietnamese War and the protests and everything else. Harvey left in '56, and they're talking about this wonderful magazine of Harvey's in the '60s. And I have my whole career during the time that I was the editor was fighting down this cult worship of Harvey being the institutor of Mad Magazine. It was something that I was very sad about.
Al, it's a good story, but it's a little bit off the subject.
Yeah.
Just checking.
Other Al, what kind of reaction do you get from people about MAD?
Usually people are disappointed that I'm not a shrink. As a matter of fact, I met a fellow that I used to play tennis with, and he said, "You write books?" And I had a bunch of paperback books, and I gave them to him, and when I saw him the next day, he said, "You seem like such an intelligent fellow, and you do this." But in a certain age group, I would say in the people in their maybe late 30s, between 30s and 50s, their reaction is overwhelmingly positive. They say things like, and brace yourself for this, "You validated my life," and I've heard things comparable to that. They said, I was a little kid in Wisconsin, and I never saw anything but cows. And then you had this article about how to solve the big city parking problems, and one of the gags was, move out to an area where there are no cars. And I couldn't just show an empty space, so I drew a cow in the background standing on one of its udders, and that captivated him for some reason. It was just a throwaway. I had to put something in there.
It was like a hunk poster.
So that brought him to the big city. But No, I don't mean to be lighthearted, flippant about it. I do get wonderful, wonderful reactions from people who are in their 40s and 50s who said those were the golden days of Mad Magazine, and I remember them as a kid and all that. Today, children, young people are involved in so many other things. Among them, they are being entertained by people who were the ones who did it in MAD. And these people learn to do the kind of stuff they're doing now that's in sitcoms and so forth. And even advertisers copied MAD. They're making fun of themselves when we did it and MAD. It was a breakthrough. But now they do it, and I think MAD deserves the credit for that.
I have a story about early on when I first took over MAD and I was working as editor. I'd go socially to a party or something like that, and the guy said, "What you do?" And I said, "I'm the editor of MAD Magazine." He said, "That magazine?" And I'd say, "Did you ever read it?" "No." I said, "Take it home and read it. Read your kids' magazine." And I'd see him next time at a party, and he'd say, "Hey, that magazine's pretty good. Do those kids really understand that satire?" And that was kind of fun.
David Letterman was quoted one time as saying his entire career was basically snappy answers to stupid questions. And more recently, I don't know if you saw on Stephen Colbert's show a couple of months ago, he did a birthday salute to Al Jaffee, which was a very nice little trip. And Stephen Colbert wrote the foreword to the new collection of Al's Tall Tales book, which is out. So there's another generation being influenced. I'm afraid I have to clear the room in a minute so I can interview another brilliant man named Mike Peters. But would you join me in thanking Mr. Sergio Aragones, Mr. Al Jaffee, Mr. Arnie Kogan, Mr. Al